we have a set of three speakers, each with different and similar experiences in bringing in more native species the into their inventory, phasing out invasive species, and I'd first like to introduce Paul Laporte. He is the owner of Ephemeral Arc Nursery, where he specializes in the propagation of native woodland species. He currently serves as chair of the Ontario Native Plant Growers Association and is a member of the Ontario Biodiversity Council and an active contributor to the Southern Ontario Seed Strategy. Paul's presentation is called Strengthening Native Species Supply Chains. Paul, take it away.
Thanks, Julian. You can see my screen, I'm assuming. Yes?
Yes, I can.
Okay, perfect. As mentioned, so my name is Paul Laporte. I have a small nursery in Port Perry, which is on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island. And I focus predominantly on propagation of woodland species. I wanted to start off with this really cheery image of The Garden of Death by Hugo Simberg. As much as it may have a sort of macabre feel about it, I actually find that it's kind of interesting as a horticulturalist myself, someone who propagates plants. This is a vocation of my life, and I know that I share that with a lot of people on this particular call. So it is kind of an interesting synergy that I find between growers and people who are what I characterize as plant people. And over the course of being in business over 19 years, I've had the pleasure of engaging with a lot of different growers and a lot of different organizations. And seeing that shared interest of horticulture is sort of what this is all about, the embodiment of people sharing knowledge and partnering and entwining with their varied interests and their passion around plants. So this presentation is largely about partnerships, but it's also very much the recognition that this isn't just about pretty flowers. It isn't just about what nature does for us. It is the broader spectrum of these pollinator groups and providing for all of them, providing for their life cycles and the necessities for them to be able to complete their processes and contribute to the greater biodiversity all the way through all the pollinator groups. And then even when we move up to the trophic levels, these primary producers, which are the native plants, obviously supply food for every single organism all the way up the food chain. Everything that we know and love. And a shout out to the spotted salamander, which is one of the only vertebrates that photosynthesizes. But everything we know and love, all the species of birds that traverse through Canada and Ontario in particular, all of the mammals and all the organisms that intertwine, they rely on those native plants being healthy and rich within the ecosystem to be able to complete their own life cycles. So I am the chair of the Ontario Native Plant Growers Association, and this is also because of that desire for partnership. So World Wildlife Fund, Carolinian Canada, and Canada Wildlife Federation have really given an umbrella for the nurseries that you see here and more. So we are actually hoping to grow our ranks next year. And February 26th, there's a big convention planned, and we're hoping to actually have more nurseries join because it's imperative that we have partnerships to be able to meet the demand of native species throughout Ontario. And every single nursery that you see here, we've been meeting pretty much since 2019, talking shop and trying to basically improve efficiencies and learn from each other on how to improve what we're doing, and also have ethical seed source and provenance as a main portion of what we're doing. We are all invested in the same area, so we basically struggle with a lot of the same challenges. And meeting demand that is growing is a big concern because obviously there's a lot of people who are advocating for more native plants, but the supply chain is not there to meet those demands. Particularly in my area, which is growing woodland species, the demand is exponential, but the supply is an extremely difficult and challenging task to meet. So, yes, we are here. I'm presenting to you from Ontario. So, when we're speaking specifically about native plants, the challenge then gets even that much more difficult because we actually have to start getting into the ecoregions and really collecting and preserving and scaling up specific genotypes within the province as well. So, it isn't just a native plant from anywhere, it's actually a native plant that is local and close to where we are. Add to those challenges, we have over 1,800 species of flowering plants in Ontario, and you're dealing with wetland species, you're dealing with woodland species, you're dealing with edge habitat species, prairie species, and alvar species, all of which require their own specifications and their own ability to actually be able to grow them. So the challenges are quite great, and the demand is growing. So this partnership regime that I'm speaking of is imperative, once again, to meet that demand. So these are kind of some of the challenges that growers would find, and essentially, again, it is about locally sourced native plants. We are really invested in provenance and actually scaling up the genetics from specific areas, and this is mainly to help aid in the adaptation as we're dealing with climate change, preserving these genetics and making sure that they're available for the future. Nurseries do grow a wide array of species, but not everyone specializes in everything. As I said, there's 1,800 species within the province, so there can be challenges in meeting demand for every nursery, and we do share that knowledge and work together to sort of provide for a lot of different consumers. But it does start with seed acquisition, and it is about ethical seed collecting and within guidelines and standards, but also to produce high quality plants as well. And this can take years. So part of the issue is that the supply chain needs well in advance notice. I think any grower would tell you it takes upwards of 4 or 5 years to be able to meet a demand of specific species. And this shouldn't be discouraging in terms of actually creating these plants and actually starting these initiatives. It's basically a matter of communication within the partnership chain. So it can take a very long time. You've got to deal with staffing. You've also got to be able to provide for seed collectors. It's a very wide network of people that bring native plants to the table. And what's particularly interesting about this conference is the Grow Me Instead guides and the idea of providing information to people of what's available. In my logic, it's that we should be actually thinking 5 years ahead. What do we want to have 5 years from now available? Not so much what is available today, but those discussions should be ongoing and they should be always continuing to grow as the plants do themselves. Often within native plant regimes, the advocacy is for a particular type of plant. And once again, this is where there can be gaps because within the early spring ephemeral season, in my case, you'll find there aren't a lot of providers for some of these species because they take a really long time to grow. So it does start with the seeds. It does start with a lot of expertise and a lot of different people being able to collect these seeds and knowing when they're ripe and how to actually treat them and deal with them. But also, I will get into some of the greater challenges in speaking about two specific species. But also, it's not just about seed. Plants are a much integral part of this as well, because sometimes you're dealing with seed that is the size of dust. Sometimes they're really hard to actually germinate. So you're not casting these seeds like corn. And in some scenarios, yes, grassland seed can easily germinate, but in other cases, they really do require some special provisions to be able to grow them. So I do focus mainly on woodland species. You'll see here that this is Jack in the Pulpit. I'm going to talk a little bit about this species because it is kind of emblematic of what I'm dealing with any one species, and I do grow quite a few. But the challenges are wide. So basically, it is in the arum family, which you have about 3,700 species across the planet of these. And they all sort of share the same characteristics, but within Canada or with Ontario, we have about 5 species of these. I focus on 3, which are green dragon, skunk cabbage, and as I mentioned, Jack in the Pulpit. So they all have these spadex and they have a spathe. And basically, this isn't the flower structure. And they're also hermaphrodites, so they switch their gender of their flower every single year. They'll go from being a male flower initially, and then they'll turn into a female flower, and then eventually revert back to being a male because of the exhausting nature of producing berries. So they all start out as male flowers after about 6 years. So 5 to 6 years, you're going to get a flowering plant. And this is a sacrificial male for this particular presentation. I've stripped the spathe open, and you can see down the spadex is these diminutive little flowers that are down low. The male flower actually has an exit hole, so this being a dioecious species has a male and a female, or it can be have both, but it can't be self-pollinating. But essentially, the pollinator is a fungus gnat. So the flowers themselves smell like fungus and it attracts the pollinator into them. And after, pollination, you might find that some of these pollinators are also consumed. Once again, feeding the wider trophic levels. But also, once you have germination, you get these wonderful clusters of berries. So seasonal interest is definitely in there for the gardener. I have been growing this particular one for about 19 years now, so this is a very mature one, and they can live up to 25 years of age. So when we're talking about the supply, once again, treating these, you're obviously getting these berries out. They have a lot of oxalic acid. I collect from multiple regions across Ontario, and I have to basically keep them all isolated so that they maintain their genetic lines. And I have to also keep a steady supply, so an awful lot of plants to meet an awful lot of demand. And this will give you an indication of how long it can take a jack in the pulpit to reach what I would say a horticultural industry has expectations for. So you're seeing 5 to 6 years of seed growth along here. And as we see on the end, this is like what you might see in like 6 or 7 years. So when we're trying to compete with a tulip on the landscape, it gets really challenging for a grower to provide something like that. And many growers will be selling to, shall I say, ecologically minded people when they're younger and more juvenile plants because these people know what they're getting. But the average consumer is going to be expecting something of this nature. So a grower has to have the lead time and the ability to grow these plants over multiple generations in the thousands. So I do grow in climate controlled conditions. I do try and trick these plants. I am actually growing jack in the pulpits right now at this time of year. But essentially trying to beat those timelines. And as I said, you're having to hold on multiple years of stock. You're also having to orchard. Orcharding is a very significant factor within the ability to produce these plants. And that's something that is all about these broader partnerships. But it is all well worth it. I mean, we're talking about the wood thrush that actually uses the seeds from this. We're talking about wild turkeys. They also consume these seeds. So this is a contributor to biodiversity, and it is a great species to have. It just needs a lot of lead time and a lot of partnership and a lot of communication to get it onto the market for the broader public. I'll speak briefly about one more species, which is bloodroot. Bloodroot is a very special plant to me, and I advocate strongly for early spring flowering plants. Part of the concern is that we often overlook these plants, and they are integral to the pollinator system. So in a pollinator garden, having those early spring flowering plants is something that's very important, but this is one of the most challenging species to produce. So once again, it has its own regime of seed collection. It has its own regime of actually dealing with the seed, stratifying it. These are all full of their little elaiosomes, these little white protein appendages for the ants that like to consume them in the wild. But it can take a double dormancy, so 2 years before it actually will germinate. And then as a grower, you've got to have it in the substrate that you know that it likes, a free draining one. And you've also got to be very attentive to the root systems. So often I end up orcharding bloodroot right away. Unlike Jack in the Pulpit, I send these out within the second year so that they can basically be nurtured by nature. And nature is actually a good help. We are really good at being able to germinate these seeds, but nature gets much better at being able to take care of the plants as time goes on. But you hear again, just like Jack in the Pulpit, you can see this is a 10-year timeline for the development. And you can find most ephemerals are like this, be it trilliums or so forth. Any ones that you would think of, you're talking about years and years before they reach a size that is basically marketable to be able to get out there. So there needs to be a lot of partnership to be able to get this happening. I basically sell out of these every single year, and I only grow these in my particular region, but I do have demand from all over Ontario. So some of my partnerships are starting to expand to try and collect the genetics of the local species and basically implement similar growing techniques with other nurseries that you saw on the ONPGA. It is a beautiful plant, and it is great to have these plants within early pollinator gardens. Even though you have prairie species in the early spring, say April, it's fantastic to be able to have plants that serve as forage material for pollinators. So there is a lot of species that I am growing, and they all have their own requirements. They all have their own unique attributes and challenges. And ultimately, as I've advocated again, it's all about this orcharding in this scenario. These aren't growing in hothouses. They aren't growing in typical greenhouses. They require specific conditions. They can use our help in the early stages, but effectively, I call these the fine wine of plants that are often overlooked within planting regimes. And they need greater attention and they need greater partnership. And I'm thankful with the ONPGA and all of the NGO partners that we have that we are actually being able to achieve these goals, and the partnerships are growing throughout the province to meet the demand on the grow me instead list, like wild ginger and so forth. I believe we will succeed, but I think it's going to take a significant amount of time to get there and a significant amount of integration and working together. So we have a whole cornucopia of beautiful plants that we can work from that are native species in the landscape, and I don't see any reason to use anything else. So that I leave it with this last image as I find that they are striking and deserving of their own attention in every way. So basically, I look forward to everyone else's presentations, and that is it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. I also agree. Ephemerals are fine as wine. They are beautiful to see on the landscape in the spring. I'll pass it on to our next speaker. Saskia Kirsten grew up immersed in the horticultural industry as one of the third generation owners of Vandermeer Nursery in Ajax, Ontario. After completing an advanced diploma in landscape design, she spent the last 8 years refining the nursery's brand voice, strengthening its community presence, and promoting education through plant literacy and responsible gardening initiatives. Saskia's presentation is called Out with the Old, Navigating a Retail Breakup with Invasives. Thank you, Saskia.
All right, so hi everybody. My name is Saskia Kirsten. I am one of the co-owners of Vandermeer Nursery in Ajax, Ontario. I am just going to try to get my... Okay, so I am one of the co-owners of Vandermeer Nursery in Ajax, Ontario. We are a traditional garden center, so a little different than what Paul chatted about. We are not 100% native. We do carry native species, and I'm going to mainly talk through our experience with discontinuing invasive species, and then I'll get into a little bit of our native selection that we're carrying as well. A little bit about us. We are located in Ajax, Ontario. We're about 45 minutes east of Toronto. For scale, we're growing about 3 million plants per year. We grow everything except for our trees and shrubs, and we are currently run by second and third generation. So I am the third generation side of that. For myself, my experience is in landscape design was my schooling, and I'm currently working in the retail and marketing aspects of the business. I do want to preface a little bit with my personal beliefs. I don't believe from my experience with the average consumer that 100% native gardens are going to meet most of their expectations, but I do think that gardens can balance environmental responsibility and creating aesthetic, enjoyable spaces at the same time. And that's kind of the balance that we're trying to have in the gardens as well. The other thing to remember when I'm chatting about this is not every gardener is a gardener. And what I mean by that is there's a distinct difference between homeowners that are gardening because of the societal expectations or to create an enjoyable space for themselves, and gardeners who are doing it because they genuinely love the hobby. We serve both in the garden center, and we see a difference in the type of consumer that we have. So diving into our invasive species, We began discontinuing back in 2015. So this has been 10 years for us so far. And we did this slowly and entirely quietly up until 2024. So for 8 years, we made decisions based on our own personal experience in our own gardens. My aunt volunteers at a conservation area locally to us, and my mom is in forests across Ontario with one of her hobbies. So we were no longer comfortable carrying certain species on the bench from our own personal experience. We started this with no public announcements. We didn't share with the public. We just started cutting things. So 2015, we cut 2 different species. 2022, we cut 3 different species. And 2023, we cut 4 more, which got us up to 9 species total. When we first started, all of our species were varieties that had minimal sales impact. So they were low quantities sold. And more often than not, we found that they were selling on the bench because we offered them, not because customers were coming and looking for them. So removing them was fairly easy for us. We saw minimal impact from doing this. In 2024, decided to go public and make a bit more of a push. This is when we really started going all in on discontinuing invasive species from our selection. We were happy with our previous decisions, but we started seeing more conversation in gardening circles, whether that be Facebook groups, Reddit feeds, customers in person. And I remember seeing one post very specifically that was criticizing one of our direct competitors for carrying varieties that we had already discontinued. And if I remember correctly, it was goutweed and periwinkle. So I kind of had a light bulb moment where I realized that we might be able to actually gain favor if we decided to publicly announce the decisions that we had been making previously. So we decided to go public. It was a little intimidating. We were really concerned about criticism on both ends of that customer spectrum. But our goal was to gain favor and customer loyalty, and then also to improve customer education to encourage them purchasing alternatives instead of just finding the invasive species at our competitors instead. So in 2024, to go public, we discontinued 7 more species. And that got us up to about 16 total in 9 years. Our concerns with going public, we have a wide spectrum of customers, as I've mentioned, that ranges from an average homeowner who, unfortunately, even when we educate about the invasive properties of a plant, still wants to plant it, and we do have those customers, all the way up to what I'm going to bluntly call a native purist, someone who wants 100% native gardens across Ontario, which is a fair opinion as well. But we have a really, really wide range of customers in the store, and the goal was to not alienate anybody on either end of that spectrum as well with this announcement. My concerns for our customers when we announced, I was concerned with overwhelming them with another factor I'm choosing. Again, for that average homeowner, they're overwhelmed already, and I was worried about having something else that they had to think about. I was also worried about frustrating them by not having a variety they already spent time and energy selecting on the shelf, and then educating them effectively without getting too scientific and losing the message. Again, most customers for us are not interested in it as a hobby. This is not something that they spend a ton of time or energy on. Challenges for us, obviously, we do have limitations. We'd like to continue being a business, so there is those factors that we need to consider as well. And we have not removed every invasive species yet. We are working towards that, but that was due to some of those limitations, and I'll talk about that a little bit. Our fears, again, worried about receiving more criticism than gaining favor. We were worried about upsetting customers on both ends of that spectrum. On the homeowner side of things, customers being upset we discontinued anything at all. And on the native side of things, customers being upset we didn't discontinue more. So it was trying to be able to communicate as clearly as we can for that balance. In order to do that, I wanted to add a positive approach to reduce any customer resistance to change. And in my experience, customers are resistant when they feel limited or they don't know what to do next. So in order to counteract that, what we did was created our own version of OIPC's Grow Me Instead. We tailored it specifically to our discontinued varieties and our recommended alternatives that we carried in store. And then we stressed about how that announcement was going to be received. So I started drafting our caption and our content. So we did this in a slide format. We posted this on Facebook and Instagram. We had a limit of 10 slides for Instagram. So our first slide, we clearly defined invasive species because, again, not every customer is going to know that. And then we clarified that this was not a comprehensive list of all invasive plants in Ontario, but our discontinued varieties specifically. Our second slide, we had 8 slides that looked like this. So our invasive species is on our left side. Our recommended alternative is on our right. It was really imperative to me that we included photos. I did not want customers to have to do any additional work in terms of having to go Google what something looked like. On our invasive side, we also included the continued it so customers could see this was an ongoing project for us. And on our alternative side, we flagged anything that was native and noted any considerations. So whether something was an aggressive spreader or whether it was marginally hardy. And our last slide, we included our references very clearly. I didn't want customers to feel like we were just pulling names out of a hat willy-nilly, and I wanted to have some backup to the research that we had been doing to choose those varieties that we had discontinued. When it came to selecting alternatives, our alternatives are a little different from OIPC's for a few different reasons, and I've kind of discussed that with them prior to this conference. But this is where my landscape design background came into use. So firstly, we prioritize similar garden use. So if a customer was going to pull out an invasive species of their garden, I wanted them to be able to put something new into that spot without having to change anything around it, without having to adjust. So it had to be roughly the same size and it had to be used the same way, whether that's groups and massing or a focal element or a ground cover or so on. And then second, we aim for similar aesthetic where possible. So whether that's flower color, leaf color, fall color, or leaf texture, whatever was the important factor for that plant that made them consider buying it in the first place, we aimed for a similar aesthetic in that alternative. And then we prioritize native wherever possible, but again, we're not a 100% native nursery, so we didn't do this exclusively. The priority was first having the customer find something that they felt was a direct alternative. So for drafting that caption, this took me a couple hours. It was a couple days to edit, and it was about a week before I had the courage to post it because we were so worried about how it would be received. But the goal was to first emphasize that this was an ongoing project. This wasn't a one-and-done situation, and we were still working on it in the future. We wanted to connect with the audience, share that we had similar priorities to them, and we were in this with them as well. State our need for alternatives. So this is where we still have our business and we do have our limitations. We require an alternative in order for us to be able to discontinue the invasive species, or we risk losing that customer to a competitor that's still carrying it. And then we wanted to highlight our references with our graphic attached at the bottom. We made sure that had our logo and branding on it. So if this got shared to anybody else, it still had our name on it. That post was wildly well received, way better than I expected it to go. Common comments we saw, someone had no clue that was invasive, they're pulling it out. We had people who from across the province who said they were going to come drive to support us for the spring because they were happy to see us making these decisions. We had two questions where we saw as an educational opportunity. So why is something considered invasive, and why are you suggesting blank as an alternative? It's not native. My great example for this, Amber maple being the invasive species, the Grow Me Instead by OIPC recommends Gladitzia. It's a very different size, so it doesn't suit small lots. Our recommended alternative was a Japanese maple. Again, if you have a space for a Gladitzia and you want to go native, that's absolutely a consideration, but nobody has that option as well. 2025, we made no major changes to our strategy or our messaging. I believe I just shared the exact same post with our updated list. We did discontinue 3 more species, which got us up to 19 total in the last 10 years. And we had our first major genus cut. So Miscanthus was a big one for us this year. We did prep by expanding our perennial grass selection with more panicum, andropogon, and sporobolus. So customers still had options for those. But unfortunately, this was the first time we really heard more customer feedback where when we said we didn't have it because it was invasive, they said, that's okay, I'm going to go purchase elsewhere. This was the first genus that we saw more of that feedback for, and that just kind of highlighted why we still have a few varieties that we have not discontinued, but we're hoping to in the future. Again, meeting that need for a good, viable alternative. Which leads me into future plans and challenges. So there's 2 major genus we're itching to place, that is burning bush, Japanese barberry. We're aware of the impact on both of these, but unfortunately they are too severe of sales and customer loss to discontinue without a solid, viable alternative. The current available alternatives on the market, we don't see as reliable enough for our area. Our recommendation for the burning bush would be sweet spire, and we have trialed these in our gardens and they are just not thriving. We suspect it's due to the high pH that we have in Durham. And barberry, our alternative would be something like 9-bark for the foliage color, and it's so prone to powdery mildew that I just don't think customers would be satisfied with that. So we're hoping for, there are sterile varieties that are coming onto the market. I know not everybody loves the concept of a sterile variety, but for both of these, we feel quite confident that they would be genuinely sterile. For the burning bush, It's Fireball seedless. We have spoken with the breeders directly of this variety. They've been trying to germinate it for 7 years. They've had a 0% success rate, so we feel quite comfortable with this one. Unfortunately, it's a supply chain issue right now. We have been trying for 3 years to get them from one of our suppliers in Ontario, and they just have not hit Canada in any significant numbers right now, so we cannot get them yet. The Barbary is a little bit of a bigger discussion. There are 2 sterile Barbary breeders in the US. One is PW, but the primary one is Dr. Mark Brand at the University of Connecticut. He's been developing that worry-free series for 15 years, and he's actually had 2 of his varieties that have been permitted for sale in New York State. And if you're not familiar, New York State has a complete ban on Barbary. These have been independently tested and proven to be sterile. So we'd love to see them in Canada. The unfortunate difficulty is there is a Barbary ban that not a lot of people are aware of due to it being an alternate host of wheat rust virus. So there are only 11 cultivars that are allowed in Canada that were evaluated back in 2001 by Agriculture Canada. And they have not reevaluated new varieties since, nor do we think they're going to. They are really reluctant to spend time on matters for ornamental plants. So we don't anticipate them doing anything anytime soon, which is really unfortunate because there are sterile varieties that are very likely going to be resistant to wheat rust virus. We just cannot get them in Canada unless they decide to go through and do that evaluation, which we're not very hopeful for. But in the meantime, what we've done with both of these 2 species is we have made efforts to reduce our sales. So we've relocated both of them to the back of the yard to reduce impulse purchases. We have reduced purchases of cultivars with their seed counts, and we're no longer advertising any of them on our social media, our email, road sign, website, anything like that. You can see on the right there the change that we've seen in the last 4 years. So we have dropped in sales on both of these species by quite a large amount. We've seen in our nursery and our perennial sales across the board, just on these specific varieties, and increases on others as we pushed other things to the front of the store instead. Very briefly about our native plants. I didn't include it with every other discussion because it was a very independent decision for us. What I find with customers in store is it is a very big stretch to have a customer come in looking for an invasive species and to convince them to purchase a native plant. More often than not, there is not a direct alternative that's going to suit what they're looking for. So our goal, if you consider that spectrum of customers again, is just to move everybody along it just a little bit further to a more environmentally sound decision. So if they come in looking for an invasive species, if I can get them to get a cultivar, that's a win in my book. If they come in looking for a cultivar and I can convince them that they need to purchase a native plant as well, that's a win in my book. I don't like giving absolutes. I don't like saying they have to be 100% native. So we tend to have the messaging of just start with one, anything helps, just put one native plant in. You don't have to go 100% native to make a bit of an impact in your area. We have seen a good increase in the native department. I don't believe that the increase in natives has come from the same customer as our discontinued basis. I do think that the sales increases may have helped offset any loss from discontinuing invasive varieties. We are promoting those native plants the same way we promote anything else. So we have our seminars, posters, social sales, and plant placement, which just one mention on that. We do have a native plant section specifically that has them all together, but we also place our native plants through our regular departments as well with their associated cultivars. So if a customer's not coming in looking for a native plant specifically, they're still exposed to it and can consider purchasing that as well. My recommendations in the future, if you are a garden center or grower that's considering discontinuing invasive species, start small, start with what you're comfortable with, get some customer experience, get some feedback, and go from there. Be as open and honest as you can about it, and always give your customers a good alternative. If you're a customer or advocate hoping to see change, inquire with your local garden centers. We don't know what you're looking for if you don't ask, but please do it nicely. If you come in guns blazing and angry, more often than not, you're going to end up dismissed. But if you come in hoping to have a productive conversation, you might gain more out of it, and I would gain more out of it. Number 2, appreciate any steps you see in the right direction. So more often than not, a grower or a garden center might make 1 or 2 changes. If you criticize that they aren't doing enough, they are going to take a step backwards and they are going to stop making those types of decisions. If you show appreciation enthusiastically that you appreciate them making that change, you will consider seeing, or you will potentially see more changes like that. And number three, just support any IGCs or independent garden centers that are making those changes that you want to see, not just in their native plants, but if you need a bag of soil or a pot. I've always been raised with a family business on mind that you vote with your dollars, and where you put your dollars chooses who gets to continue staying in business. So if you have any questions for me, there's that Q&A period after the next presenter, and I'm happy to answer anything.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Saskia. Really, it's brought up we've learned a whole bunch just from speaking to you, hearing from, the grower's perspective. And, we also agree that it's a win in our books when we replace just one invasive species with a native species. And you really did a good job also of demonstrating the different types of gardeners that come to purchase plants. There's some people that they're doing it because of societal reasons and expectations for what your yard should look like, and then
Mhm.
others that are doing it because they just love gardening. So thank you for drawing that comparison. Again, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. We're going to bring everyone back in just a moment. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Jason Recker. He's a national perennial manager at Brookdale Treeland Nursery Limited, BTN. As one of the largest commercial growers of ornamental plants in Canada, Jason shares some of his perspectives on how BTN has wrestled with this issue. He explains how more education, dialogue, and standardization of language would help create alignment and get growers on board as partners in reducing the invasive problem. Now, the name of the presentation is Invasive Plants, Perspectives from a Commercial Grower. Jason, thank you for being with us today.
Yeah, you're welcome. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, first hurdle overcome. Yeah, thanks, Saskia and Paul, for your presentations. I agree with pretty much everything you're saying there. I think you bring some very practical feedback to this issue, and I think yeah, I'm just going to add on my comments from a commercial grower perspective. So I'm just going to share my screen here. You can see that okay? Okay, I got a thumbs up. That's great. So at BTN, we're a commercial grower supplying independent garden centers, as well as Home Depot, Costco, Loblaw, with a wide variety of perennial and trees and shrubs to their garden centers. Our core purpose, really what drives us is this idea of making life beautiful. And I know everybody has different ideas about what beauty means. There's a few things that we believe that means. We think that means that beautiful plants are part of what makes life beautiful. It would be a sad place to live if we didn't have plants around us. We also believe that attracting more people to the world of plants and the world of gardening is good for both human beings and for the planet. And we also believe that there's room for diversity in approaches to styles of gardening. I've grown up in this business since I was standing on a cinder block on a potting bench because I couldn't reach the bench. So, I've rubbed shoulders and met many nursery and greenhouse growers over the years. And one of the things I've always loved about this industry is that most people are just really good people. They're down to earth. They care about plants. They're not in it to make a ton of money. If they wanted to do that, they would certainly pick a different career. and most of them want to be ecologically responsible. I think where growers struggle is that while they don't want to contribute to invasive plants or plants that harm the environment, they're just oftentimes just confused or just don't understand what makes something invasive or harmful. When we're looking to grow a business and sell plants, we're looking at what the consumer wants. And the consumer has been pretty clear over the years by voting with their dollars and with their comments that they want plants that are in bloom or that have colorful foliage. They want something that's easy to grow. We figure probably 85% of people who buy plants would not consider themselves gardeners. They are buying plants to decorate or beautify their environment. They fear failure, and they fear killing. They fear that they're going to kill plants. And so plants that are easy to grow help people feel successful and helps encourage them to continue further down this path of growing plants and gardening. And when they fail, they're much more likely to drop it and just go watch more Netflix or something else. Plants need to be pest and disease resistant. Customers are much less likely these days to want to be able to want to spray or apply pesticides or fungicides or other chemicals to keep plants looking nice. And so plants are being bred to be more and more disease resistant, to need less water, less fertilizer inputs, and so on. And that's important to customers because they do not want to put a lot of time and effort into artificially keeping their plants looking nice in the garden. New varieties and colors are important and are often what drives the industry. That people are always looking for something new and exciting. And when you bring new varieties to the market, that drives a lot of sales and drives a lot of excitement from the consumer. And one of the things we wrestle with is, if people aren't attracted to plants and they don't feel compelled to buy them, what happens? Do they buy less attractive plants? Maybe, but our fear is that they'll just garden less. There's a lot of competition for the consumer's time and energy and dollars. And if we make gardening difficult, or it doesn't make their environment more beautiful or more peaceful or more relaxing in some way, it seems less likely that they're going to choose gardening and planting plants as part of a lifestyle. Some of the challenges that we've observed is just, first of all, just unclear standards and definitions of what is invasive. I mean, some plants seem obvious, like goutweed, and I'll be the first to admit I'm embarrassed that we used to sell that years ago as an absolute thug. And that plant has been the bane of many gardeners' existence. Some plants are listed without clear rationale or evidence. So, for example, why steer people away from daylily? I understand that we might want to promote a native plant, but it's really confusing to a grower when all 80,000 cultivars of Hemerocallis are lumped in with the orange ditch lily, which is actually invasive. And then it's difficult to know, where to draw these lines, especially when some of these plants have really important, or what we see as really important uses, such as dry shade in urban areas, which is a very, very challenging garden scenario. And it seems that there's very few practical substitution options out there. Secondly, do the alternatives meet the criteria that are important to today's customer, right? Are they attractive at the point of sale? uh, keeping in mind that 70-80% of garden center sales happen in April and May, and that the bulk of garden center sales are driven by bloom or some other form of interesting color, it's challenging to create sales volume at during a very small window with plants that really don't look very showy. Are the alternatives economical? Paul spoke very well to this issue. I mean, we can grow an ajuga in 12 weeks. If I want to grow a nice tray of Asarum canadense, we're looking at probably a 2-year production cycle. It could be 3 to 5 times higher. So if you're planting one plant, maybe you can spare a few extra bucks. But if you're trying to convince somebody to create a ground cover garden made of something that's going to cost 5 times more than something else, that's a tough sell. Are the criteria easy to grow? Do they have otherwise good landscape performance? Are they pest and disease resistant? And to Saskia's point earlier, do they work and play well with others? And it's difficult to offer an alternative when it doesn't really fit into that same gardening space, or it's more likely to run amok and take over everything else that the customer values. Just an example here of just what consumers often face. You've got the Echinacea purpurea on the right, and then you've got one of the cultivars on the left. Are we prepared? Are customers prepared to have different expectations about quality when it comes to pot presentation at retail? And thirdly, can the supply chain support the initiative? Can growers reproduce and build stock rapidly enough? Can we actually source material? Does the source material meet these exacting requirements of commercial growers? Is the product weed free? Is it uniform? You have a high germination percentage, delivered on what are often tight production schedules. And is there enough variety available to keep customers interested in planting more? What is going to drive that demand from the consumer for always having something new and interesting to try in their garden? So 4 steps forward that we just wanted to share and bring up here is, first of all, having standard evidence-based lists of invasive plants by region. I've looked at many different invasive plants. Almost none of them are all the same. That makes it really confusing and creates uncertainty about, well, what should we actually do, and what does it really mean to be responsible citizens of the horticulture world. Secondly, would love to look at more research on what it would take to change customer perceptions of style. The highly curated look may not be something we want to promote in the future, but what's the alternative and how do we change that? The fashion industry spends billions of dollars every year to convince you that the outfit that you're wearing today is no longer attractive and you should buy this other thing that looks ridiculous. That's the fashion industry spending billions of dollars. Does changing customer perception on what an attractive garden or an attractive plant looks like require that kind of push? How do we accomplish that? Do we have to showcase some of these alternative plants in public and commercial gardens to really show people how beautiful they can be? Thirdly, education or tours for growers, just showing us, for example, the plants and how they're impacting the environment. I was horrified to see on my local woodland trail Hedera helix that had escaped from a neighboring garden and was blanketing everything. Uh, that that had more impact on me than someone telling me that it's an invasive plant. So, are there more examples like that where growers could perhaps be exposed or shown what these plants are actually doing in the environment? I think that would have a greater impact than uh, just debating with somebody verbally about it. And then, fourthly, more dialogue. I think, and again, in my experience, most growers are trying to be good community partners and contribute to a better planet, even if we don't always agree on everything. I think growers really do want to and are willing to be constructive partners on this issue and help solve some of these challenges that we are facing. I appreciate everyone's time. Thanks.
Thank you, Jason. You started off with making, the reason why you're gardening is making life beautiful. And, I think about that fear that you brought up. I talk to my folks about gardening and they say, I don't have a green thumb. They stay away for that reason. So, that is a real fear that, you want to provide a product that's going to be easy to grow, and lower that barrier to entry into gardening continue to help people continue their journey. We've received quite a bit of questions in the chat. And just to rewind there, Jason, you also mentioned showing examples of invasive species in the natural environment, that you mentioned the blanketing of the ivy. And it brought up a question for us. Maybe we should develop some invasive species tours to help educate the public on some of the impacts of these species that are escaping cultivation.
I'll be the first
So
to sign up.
wonderful, wonderful. We'll put that one on our list for next season. Yeah, so I wanted to kind of go through some of these questions, but first to tie some of the discussions that all three of you have been having. Um, we wanted to, there's an issue about the attractiveness at point of sale. Paul, you kind of started us off. You mentioned that you might sell some native species at an earlier stage to gardeners who have a better understanding of what these plants look like and what is the importance. And I wonder, if there are any tips from maybe Saskia or Jason on how to improve what a native plant looks like, when some of the tips on making them more attractive to customers at point of sale.
Oh, I mean, speaking from my experience, like we are growing a lot of our native plants from, or not native perennials from seed this past year, just to try to increase our selection. And what we have found is we have to water with non-fertilized water because they just grow faster than everything else. We're finding that they get really, really tall, really overgrown in their pot size. So trying to keep things still in that dense, full to the edge of the pot size without overgrowing the pot is a little more difficult. But consumers, if it's small in that pot or that pot size is even small, I get the grow time is longer on it, but they just don't see the value in it for the average consumer. An educated consumer that is prioritizing native plants is an entirely different ball game. But
Definitely. And Jason, did you have anything to say there?
Yeah, I think, improving the labeling of plants, bigger, more color on the labels. Again, that's, struggle with that too, because that ends up being more plastic, or, more waste that we're generating to try to promote something that's more sustainable. So that's, those are some of the things that we struggle with. But um, yeah, it's a great question. I don't know that I have an answer right now, but it was something I'd love to continue discussing.
Um, Paul, I heard from Jason that dry shade is very difficult area to find plants for. Did you have any suggestions for that?
Yeah, so I mean, I could advocate that there's a native plant for every situation because obviously they were here before any non-natives came into play. So, I mean, in some scenarios, when I hear dry shade, it usually means under an invasive, such as Norway maple. So I get a lot of people asking, what do they do in that scenario? Sedges, even native sedges, seem to do quite well in there. So you're looking at texture, you can look for foliage, you're looking for seasonal interest. It is an art form to producing native plants, and it is a new genre. So the people who kind of wield the brushes of this are learning how it can complement not only non-native species, but it can also create entirely new regimes. So I'm not going to specifically get into which ones will thrive in that scenario, but I will say that there's a vast array of sedges that all have their own textures and their own foliage and bracts and seasonal interest that could easily apply to that scenario. And they're relatively easy to produce on scale as well. So I to your point earlier about plants looking good, it is. Uh, I find that I sell out all the time. And early spring flowering ephemerals look every bit as good as any other plant that's offered. As I mentioned in the presentation, the issue right now is that they're just not scaled. As Jason mentioned very aptly, it's challenging to get those regimes in place. But I think conversations help that succeed. I think we can achieve it in the long run to have things like trilliums available and have wild ginger more widely available. I think both Saskia and Jason would agree that those are great plants to include in the landscape. So hope that answers the question.
I think I'd like to also ask Saskia. You mentioned a shift in a reduction in sales of some of the more common invasive species.
Mhm.
Is this a trend that you feel is long lasting? So when we're looking, let's look 10 years down the road. Do you imagine retail stock will shift more and more towards native cultivars due to a shift in what is considered aesthetic?
I mean, what is considered aesthetic is a really wide range. That's going to vary by customer so greatly. The unfortunate part with the shift away from invasive species, we are seeing more discussion about it. We're seeing a few more customers coming in or advocating for natives or non-invasives, but it's still a large minority. Um, for scale, I ran some numbers. Our native plant sales, despite those big jumps, is only about 1.1% of our total plant sales for the entire business for the year. It's still something we're seeing trending upwards, but the shift away from, say, that burning bush and barberry, the big drops in sales that we've seen, has not been customers not asking for them. It's just been we've moved them. We've reduced the impulse purchasing on them, but the average consumer
Mm.
is still wildly unaware of the invasive properties because, like I said, they're not gardening as a hobby. They are coming in saying, hey, I want a recommendation that is low maintenance, easy care, and I can't kill it, and it looks good. Um, like Jason kind of mentioned, they want something for the front of their house that they don't have to touch again once they plant it and establish it. And the unfortunate thing is both that barberry and the burning bush would fall into those categories aside from if you have a less educated staff member might recommend those items in a different garden center, all we've done to kind of see that shift in sales is not recommended them anymore. I do think that there can be more movement towards that direction, but I think it needs to be more in mainstream marketing to get, like, I would even suggest to you guys or anyone else who wants to see that move, like we put out ads that say, hey, I have trilliums in stock right now, or my crab apples are here, or whatever, to just start getting general ads out there to talk about the fact that there are invasive plants that are not hitting niche locations, but hitting a mainstream marketing message. Might cause more of a shift 10 years from now to less of those invasives being demanded for.
That's great. You really just touched on another question from the Q&A from one of our past speakers from yesterday, Kathy Cavasalis, about marketing strategy. And she was asking if there's a way to market these alternatives beyond just a decoration and something that can focus on supporting more pollinators and birds. So this is kind of touches on the education aspect.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, so we do like, so stuff like planting for pollinators, I think has gotten more mainstream with average consumers than native plants or invasive plants. The planting for pollinators message is out there. And we are seeing that demand from consumers walking into the store. What I'm finding though is you still get a consumer who says, I don't want something that attracts bees because, well, we see the benefit for pollinators. I don't want bees around my patio. What we're doing to kind of get that message across for pollinators specifically is like we have a new sticker that we've done on our plants for the last 3 years or so now with logos on it. It's got a maple leaf for a native. It's got a bee for those bee friendly. It's got a butterfly for butterfly friendly. We don't go into the beetles and the flies and the hummingbirds, but those two generic pollinators we are messaging to. I do think that like we still market. We have a planting for pollinators seminar. We have a gardening with Ontario native seminar. It resonates with some people and it doesn't resonate with others. There's still the consumer that pays no mind to it, but I do think pushing more on the pollinator aspect as opposed to native has more of a feel-good moment because it feels like people are saving something. It feels like they are making an impact if you push the pollinator messaging instead of a native messaging. A lot of average consumers won't connect the two, then a native is going to support a pollinator, which is unfortunate, but the reality. So,
I mean, it's such a charismatic, they're charismatic species that people can have a connection to. So I can see pushing that messaging can help people understand more about the importance of the native alternatives. This is
Gillian,
a question. Yes,
sorry, if
go
I can
ahead,
just add,
Jason.
I think I agree with Saskia that the pollinator initiative has really taken off. We're seeing demand for that, and we like seeing that. We think that's good. I mean, it's getting more of the better plants in the garden. I mean, maybe some of those nativars or cultivars that are included in those programs don't quite meet the ideals of others, but it's getting more education and more plants into gardens that benefit local populations, even if they aren't the most ideal. But I will say that has been relatively easy to promote because of the attractiveness of those plants, and because it's been commonly accepted that cultivars of those plants are acceptable. It becomes more difficult, and it's going to require a lot more time and money and effort to push plants that may not have that attractive appearance at the time that in that spring period when most consumers are at the store.
I just quickly want to butt in and let everyone know that we are getting into our break, but this conversation is, I think, is so important, and so I'm gonna let us continue. Yeah, the break is goes until 11 or sorry 1:50, but we're gonna maybe continue for another, I don't know, 5, 10 minutes and see where the conversation takes us. Thank you to everyone in our panel. I've been learning, I think I've been learning a lot, and I think this discussion is really getting to the root of the issue that uh, we're trying to find solutions for. So, yes, let's Paul, I wanted to go back to something that you said about ethical seed sourcing. And could you maybe talk more about what that means and how can we support growers who want to ethically source native seeds?
Sure. So I am coming at this from sort of a restoration ecology sort of direction. So not solely on the horticultural perspective, but effectively as demand is rising, there is this apprehension about turning native seed into a commodity. So that orcharding process that I mentioned is a way by which you sort of respect the natural seed and you only collect a certain amount, and then you're obviously going to be orcharding that and scaling that up to meet a production that is much higher. So provenance, as I mentioned, there's another component there. It's not good enough to have one genotype that you're selling of trilliums, for example, or any of these species that were in the presentation there, false Solomon seal or so forth. Having one location that's scaling it up and sending it all across the province doesn't necessarily increase biodiversity in the sense of that diversity key alone. So within ethical seed sourcing, there's a lot of collaboration, a lot of dialogue, working with land trusts, getting permissions so that you're not just going off the side of the road and taking seed from someone's property. You're actually making sure that you're having a process in place whereby you're actually doing it with a methodical approach and respectful approach. So again, a lot of these processes have been taking course over years. I think that native plants are, as we know, they're on the upscale, and I think behind the scenes there's a lot of demand, and I think that as people have been saying here, the dollar sort of dictates where things will go. I think that's one of the reasons why we're having this conversation is the demand for native plants is just escalating, and people are looking for them. And I think the solution is, again, through partnership and, as I mentioned, ethical approaches to it as well. So I hope that answers the question.
Just some unmuting. Do you want to respond, Saskia?
No, I'm
Or
good. Sorry.
yeah, I think that it's a reminder that these plants are coming from a wild source. And so how do you make the collection of these species sustainable in the long term without depleting ecosystems? And the point that you brought up, Paul, about orcharding, this could also uh, solve maybe some of the demonstration issues that Jason had brought up. Like, what does this plant actually look like in a garden? To have an orchard of native species, outside of the nursery or within, close proximity to, so customers can see what this plant looks like in a more mature form.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, Julian, and I can say that without question. When you see these gardens with all of the potential and the opportunity, the textures, the different ferns, the different flowering species, but also the unfolding of the season. So early spring all the way till fall. When people see that and the dynamic activity that's taking place with pollinators, I feel like the shift it is a visual and it is something that takes time for people to sort of get. But once you put a native plant in the ground, you see results right away. And I'll say not just results, but positive results. We're surrounded by a lot of negativity in the world that we're in today. If we really want to be able to contribute back to the ecology, this is one way that you're surefire going to do it. Even with just one plant in a non-native system, you're going to have results. So, um, yeah, demonstration gardens from the seed orchards are exceptional. They're also learning areas for propagation techniques, dividing plants. As I said, you can get seed from there with not necessarily worrying about impacting the wild populations going forward. I do have seed orchards all across the province because you're trying to maintain those genotypes and you have to keep them separate, otherwise they will entwine with one another and you'll have sort of a mixed genetic line. And as Jason said, this is very challenging. I mean, it's much easier to grow lettuce. I'm growing native plants because I'm passionate about it. And as I started off with Hugo's painting there, the Garden of Death. I know everyone here shares the passion for these plants, so we don't always do it, as Jason said, for making big bucks. It's about the ecology for me. But yeah, it's anyway, it's a long road ahead for sure.
For the love of the plants, definitely. I want to just wrap it up with one last question. Either Jason or Saskia. I know that growers are very busy people. Do you have any recommendations on how we can connect with them, respecting their time, and to show them garden plants growing invasively in natural areas?
I'll
I
go
mean,
first. I think
yeah, go ahead.
summer is a great time to communicate with growers. Spring, if you try to contact them in spring, they're going to ghost you.
Yeah.
But summer is a great opportunity, and it looks like from some of the comments here that there's probably lots of opportunity in the Greater Toronto area to join local groups and see what they are seeing and dealing with. So I would uh, I would be thrilled to jump on something like that for a day. I mean, Landscape Ontario does tours of nurseries, and they do grower tours every year. There's no reason why Landscape Ontario or even Greenhouse Canada, those two entities, couldn't help promote some kind of tour to showcase invasives and take it further. Showcase native uh, plantings. I think we as growers, like, just one final comment. Like, I was just talking with our sales manager the other day. Like, 20 years ago, I think we knew all the perennials that existed. Now it's completely overwhelming. Like, we, like 80,000 cultivars of Hemerocallis. I mean, dianthus, it seems like there's new dianthus coming out every day. And it's becoming terribly confusing and overwhelming. And so we just don't know anymore what's all out there. And so more education and teaching us. I mean, yeah, sometimes we just don't know what we don't know. And having folks like many of the folks here, Paul, I'm fascinated by what you're doing. I'd love to come see your place and what you're doing because I think there's opportunity there. Like, yeah, I think it's just more communication, more forums like this, more ways to connect both virtually and physically is the way to go. And I think all kinds of new connections and opportunities will open from that.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in there, Julian, and say that that's the whole thing, partnerships. I mean, with both of the nurseries here, I'd be willing to, without question, create seed orchards and demonstration gardens and build this kind of regime. I think that that's the whole point is the communication taking place here is what makes, as you say, things moving forward and makes things go in solutions. So, yeah, Jason, I'll take you up on that offer for sure.
Good. I love it. I love to see it. Thank you so much, Saskia, Jason, and Paul, for joining us today. It was a fascinating conversation. Lots and lots of engagement with the chat. And thank you for sharing your knowledge and perspectives.